Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, the daughter of a journalist and a teacher. She's been an advertising copywriter, newspaper columnist, staff writer for an international relief agency, travel writer, blogger, teacher, communications director for several nonprofits, and a personal assistant to a New York Times bestselling author. She's passionate about her faith, books, travel, nature, especially the beach, social justice, and her family. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Laura Whitfield.
Thank you, Julia. I'm so happy to be here.
Laura, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Thanks, Julia. I love that question. I actually started writing when I was very young. I started writing around 30 and wrote, as you mentioned, I was an advertising copywriter first. And I did that some when my children were small. And then later I went through a divorce and became a kindergarten teacher so I could be with my kids in the afternoon. And during that time, I used the time to work for I did some travel writing, blogging, and also got a job at a nonprofit while I was doing that. But I had the idea, I had worked for Jan Kieran, who is a New York Times bestselling author, and she was my mentor for many years. And I went to a lot of book signings with her and book events. And she had serialized her first book in her local newspaper. And she got the idea from Charles Dickens when he serialized the Pickwick Papers. So I had the idea, since I was teaching kindergarten, I was a mom of 3 daughters, to write a parenting column and maybe write a parenting book. So I went down to my local newspaper and I said, "Do you have a parenting column?" He said, "No." And I said, "Would you like one?" And he said, "Yes, we'd love it." So they came out, did a feature on me, and I started writing my column weekly. And by doing that, I actually wrote a book over the course of 2 years. So I turned it in every Friday. It was great. I had a deadline. I had an editor. And so I did that. Actually, it was my first book, but I never actually published it into book form, but did finish the book that way. And when I finished, I stopped my column. And then fast forward many years, my kids left and went off to college. And I got married, retired from teaching after 15 years. And when I went for my exit interview, my headmaster said, "You know what you told me when you started this job?" And I said, "No, what?" He said, "You told me you were just going to teach for 2 or 3 years and then stop and write your book." And then life happened. So I ended up teaching 15 years. But once I got married and retired from teaching, I spent the first year not doing anything. A friend of mine had advised me, when you retire, she said, just sit and look out the window for a year. Don't volunteer, don't do anything, don't put any pressure on yourself. And it was really some of the best advice I ever got. But after a year, I started writing memories. I sat down and just randomly would wake up and write about my grandmother or write about the house coats that my mom and my aunt used to wear, and just things from my childhood, how I spent time in nature. And I did that for about 8 or 9 months. And finally, I sat down and looked at it and I thought, I don't even know if this is a book. I'm not sure it's cohesive. I'm not sure it has an arc. And that's when my husband said, "Why don't you hire a writing coach?" So I had been taking classes with the National Association of Memoir Writers for many months and learning about memoir and structure and that kind of thing. And through that had met Brooke Warner and really liked Brooke a lot and thought she was really smart, knowledgeable. And so fast forward, I sent her some samples. I hired her as my writing coach. And in January of 2017, I started writing Untethered. So it took me about 2.5 years. So, and I published it at 65.
Well, you look wonderful for 65, and there's a gorgeous young woman on the cover of your book as well. So I want to talk about that. I know that the loss of a loved one influenced your taking risk in life, and becoming a model in New York was certainly a risk. Did that career have a big impact on your life?
It did. When in my story that I write about, after I lost my brother, I moved down to the North Carolina's Outer Banks, met a handsome DJ who I decided I would drop out of college and stay there for the fall and be with him. And then he announced to me that he was going off to New York to be a model. So about a year later, I followed him up there, and I did a little modeling in the interim. But that year was very, very hard on me and had to rebuild my life. I went back to college. And so I'm glad I did it. Looking back, now that I've written my story, I know it's part of me. And I think I learned resilience through that. I learned a lot of great lessons. I try to never waste anything that happens to me. But yeah, it did change the trajectory of my life. And I think it got me off to a rough start, honestly. The funny thing is I tell in my story that when I first signed my contract, I was 20. Then I went home. I went back when I was 23. They told me I was too old. And then I went back when I was 45 and signed with Wilhelmina. I had signed with Wilhelmina in New York, but I signed with Wilhelmina in Miami at 45, and I modeled for 10 years.
Wow.
So I was too old at 23, but not too old at 45. So,
well, hopefully the world has changed, and all types and ages and body types of women can model now.
absolutely. I really enjoyed it. The second time I did it while I was teaching kindergarten, and it was like play for me. And I would teach, I would go hop on an airplane, fly to Miami, stay for a day, take a day off, and come back. And I was always really energized when I came back to my classroom because I'd gone off and had some fun. And so I really feel like I brought my whole self back into my work, and really it was happy to be there. But it was fun. I got to travel. I got to go to Europe and did a cruise, and it was a great adventure at that point. Much more fun, no pressure at that point. So,
and gave you some great stories to tell about.
It did. Yeah.
Did working for a New York Times best-selling author inspire your own writing?
It did. I was so blessed to have met her. I met her at my first job when I was working at an advertising agency right out of college. She was a senior copywriter, and we got to be friends. And I actually gave her one of my first short stories, and she was very kind to me. It wasn't very good, but she was very gracious and kind. And I didn't really want to write short stories or fiction. My interest was really at that point in advertising, and I wanted to be a copywriter. And I tried to break in there, but my boss really liked me and my job too much, and so the door was closed. And I write about this in my book. And I decided to freelance. So I did that for 8 years. And I think my freelance style really reflects in my writing because I write very sparsely. And people have said to me, "Were you ever a copywriter?" And I said, "Yes, I was." And they can tell by the way I write. But I went to a lot of book signings with her, and I watched her, and she was amazing. She had a great rapport with the booksellers. She spoke to every single person that came to see her, looked them in the eye, no matter who was around her. She was focused just on the person right in front of her at the moment, and very lovely and gracious. People loved her books. And also I was an early reader for her books. So I watched her work. I sat at a desk beside her and I watched her work every day. She wrote for 8 hours a day. And I just watched how hard she worked, how she marketed her books in the beginning, how she hand sold things, reached out to booksellers. So that taught me a lot when my book was out about how to approach booksellers and independent bookstores, and how much I appreciate the love they've shown to Untethered. And when I go to their stores, how I know that I'm a guest, and I'm very grateful for their invitations. And it's been pretty magical. But I had a great teacher, so I'm really thankful for that. And I gave her an acknowledgement in book. I just owe her so much for that.
Well, it's wonderful to have another woman as a mentor. I think that just helps all of us when we pass it along, play it forward.
That's right. I believe that.
Does your family support your career as a writer? Sometimes memoirs can broach difficult subjects and how people handle them so differently in families.
That's right. I've seen that a lot. I was a little nervous. My husband is actually a writer. He's been incredibly supportive. Um, he loves my whole story because he knows it's part of me. So he's fully embraced it, and that I could not have written it without his support. But I also have 3 daughters that are in their 30s, and I was a little nervous, honestly, when I started writing. And I've been pretty transparent with my girls. There were a few things that I wrote about that I hadn't told them. But I was nervous when they were reading it, but they all love my book. They've been very gracious. They're very proud of me. My brother, who is also in my story, I had another brother, middle brother. He and I spent a week going through my manuscript. We were both very early risers, and we would have phone calls at 5:30 in the morning. We'd pour our coffee, and he would go through sections of my book. And he's 6 years older than me, so he knew some things and remembered things that I didn't, or remembered them in a more acute way than I did. So it was really great. And that time of bonding with him was just so special. Just remembering things together, things about our family with both of our parents gone and our brother, and hearing stories that I didn't even remember and that I'd never known. And I think that gave him an opportunity to share those with me. So I'm really grateful for that time. So yes, my family's been very supportive.
That's a very poignant time, I think, when we look back to our childhood, and all of us seem to remember it from so many different perspectives. Sometimes it doesn't sound like we grew up in the same household.
That's right. He was very generous. He would say sometimes, "Well, I remember that differently, but this is your story, and this is how I remember it." And he would share it. But if I had a strong feeling that I still remembered it the way I'd written it, it wasn't very far off. But I would, and then other times there were things that were just inaccurate that he was able to correct for me. So I was grateful for that as well, because I wanted my book to be as truthful as possible, of course.
Well, you've mentioned that you're an early riser, so I assume you're a morning writer as well. What is your writing routine?
I do write in the morning. I write best in the morning. I write in my head. I spend a lot of time constructing scenes and stories and chapters in my head. I sort of walk around, think about them, jot things down. And then when I actually sit down to write, it's pretty much there, and I just put it on the page. But I do a lot of writing in my head, and then just getting it on the page is just a formality in a way. Now, it is a first draft. It's not finished by any means, but I work out a lot of things in my, sort of in my thinking. And I tend to, I sort of edit as I go, but not in an extreme way, just enough to be able to move forward a little bit. Then I'll leave it, and then I'll come back the next day when I'm fresh, sort of rework what I wrote the day before, and then move forward. So that's how I do it most of the time.
Well, Laura, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your book and then read from it so that we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay. My book is called Untethered: Faith, Failure, and Finding Solid Ground. And it starts when I'm 14. As I mentioned, I had 2 older brothers. Lawrence was 23. He was over in Edinburgh getting a master's degree. He had joined the mountain climbing club. And in February, he was in a fatal accident. He fell from Ben Nevis, which is the tallest mountain in the UK, and was killed. And he had an extraordinary life. He'd done a lot in college, but he was engaged to be married. We didn't know it at the time. He had a full scholarship to Yale Divinity School. He was going to probably either be a pastor or teaching a college level. He just had his whole life ahead of him. And then with a slip of the foot, it was gone. And it just really shattered my world. He was my everything. So my story starts there. And it's really just how I unraveled. I came to faith that fall. And that gave me a lot of hope and just moving forward and sort of filled a void I had. But then when I moved to the Outer Banks and fell in love and was on my own, I sort of lost my way and ended up in New York, lost my way even more. And how it's about how I come home and sort of find my footing. And it took a while, but I went back to college and then fell in love, got my job in advertising, met someone there, fell in love, and how we started a family. And then through that, there's a lot about my caring for my aging parents who had a lot of health issues. And so it's about maturing, about, someone in their 30s who's made a lot of mistakes, but finally finds their way. And it's about family, love, grief. So those are some of the themes. But I thought I'd read the end of the first chapter, which is after Lawrence's funeral. And we received a large box from Edinburgh containing all of his things, that his suitcases and his books and things. So this is right after that. Several months later, I was home alone. Mom and Daddy were out running errands, and the house was quiet. I wandered up to the attic, as I often did, to poke around objects and through boxes, hoping to find some unexpected treasure. As I made my way past the brick chimney, I noticed the large wooden crate. I walked over and opened the lid. Everything was just the way we'd left it the day we discovered Lawrence's journals. On top was a small box filled with the things Lawrence had in his pocket the day he fell: a lapel pin with a white dove holding an olive branch, a silver whistle, and a few British coins. Under the box were several Oxford cloth shirts, like the ones he used to pay me a quarter to iron. I picked up a blue one, held it to my face, and breathed in. After all this time, it still smelled like Lawrence in English leather, his favorite cologne. I'd barely been holding it together, and now the tears began to flow. "Laura," I heard Daddy call from downstairs. My parents were back. I lifted my face, knowing I should answer, but I didn't. I didn't want to break the spell. I left the attic door cracked. They'll figure it out. I pressed my face into the cloth and breathed in deeply, desperate to bring Lawrence back to life. Wasn't this lingering scent a sign that he was still here, that he'd left the room and would soon return? I felt a hand on my shoulder and looked up, hopeful. It was Daddy. "You okay?" he asked gently. I didn't answer. I just pulled Lawrence's shirt to my face and cried.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
How long did it take you to write this book?
It took me 2.5 years. I started in January of 2017 and I finished in around March of 2019. And because I was working with Brooke, she edited as we went and sort of did a developmental edit. So I still did a lot of editing after that. I had a copy editor go through, and she had to cut out 10,000 words. And she did. I know it was very long. I looked at it, and after I got it back, and I really, honestly, she did such a great job. I really couldn't even tell what she cut out. And there was just one scene I remember. It was very insignificant that at some point I was like, oh, what about that scene when I was in the coffee shop in New York? And I didn't even really miss it, but she did an amazing job and got it down to where it needed to be with word count. So, and then I went through all the proofing and that, but it took, and then I signed my contract in October of 2020, and then it came out in April of 22.
I always wonder what people edit out of their book. So you don't think it was anything significant. Some writers think they took out my darlings, No,
there were things that I liked, but honestly, as you know, if things don't move the story forward, then they can go or they should go. And my book is on the long side anyway. So I'm really grateful for what she did. And I think it's a better book because of her work. But There were two scenes that before I turned it in, I cut out. Just I thought they were too much even for me. Um, but I don't think they ever saw anybody's eyes.
What about publicity? You know, we writers like to write, we don't like to promote ourselves. Have you found anything that worked, or even something that you tried that didn't work?
That's a great question. I hired a PR firm, and they did an excellent job for me. I did a bookstagram tour, and they got me I got a lot of articles and podcasts, and that was a lot of fun. And um, just really enjoyed that whole. I have a PR background too, so I've done that. So I was very involved in that, and I really enjoyed that part of it. As you know, these days being an author is half writing and half marketing. So you write it, but then you have to sell it. But I enjoyed that part. It's been fun for me, and like I said, because of the I guess the path that Jan set for me with booksellers. I went into bookstores. I hand delivered my book. I I brought things in. I stayed in contact. I was really in contact with a lot of the local booksellers, so I enjoyed doing that. That was very successful. And the other thing I did was that I loved was I had a bookmark made, and I carried those with me. They're sort of a calling card now. And so whenever I'm in a restaurant or I go somewhere and I'm talking to someone, I'll say, do you like to read? And everybody pretty much says yes. And I'll say, oh, I wrote a memoir. And they go, really? What's it about? So I hand them the bookmark, and it has my website, and I tell them they can order it anywhere, and it has my Kirkus review and a brief synopsis. And so that's been a great selling tool. People really like it.
Do you have any books in you after this one?
I do. I'm working on a second memoir. It's about my faith journey over the last 5 years. Just with the way the world has transformed and since 2016, and how it changed me, and during the pandemic, how I sat here not able to go outside and do anything really, and how I thought, this is so profound. Hopefully we'll never go through another pandemic or something like this. And how will it change me when I'm able to go out into the world? I want to live differently. So I really explored how I could be of service to people and help. And so I've gotten involved in a homeless community, and I work on an eviction hotline now. And so it's about my story to my journey to where I am now. So working on that. Got a book proposal in the process. And then I have a novel that I had the idea back in 1988. It's all outlined. I'm dying to write that. That will be after the memoir. But I need to get this memoir written. It's more timely, so I need to write it now. I've never written a novel. I'm nervous about it, but I really want to write it. And then I have a children's book that I've written, and I want to get published.
Well, you're becoming quite prolific after that first memoir, so it certainly opened something inside you.
I think so, yes.
What do you think the best money you've ever spent as a writer was?
I definitely think it was working with She Writes Press. They are a hybrid, and so it's not self-publishing, but I do make the investment initially in my book, and then I get a better return, obviously. But working with them has just been amazing. I mean, just the whole process of the team I've had, and my project manager, my cover designer. I'm so happy with my cover, my interior design, just the support. And then we have a community of authors, and we support each other. We buy each other's books, we review them, we give each other advice, we cheer each other on when we win awards or have events. And that's just been amazing. I just love it. I love the writing community. I try to be very involved. I try to give back as much as possible. But there's nothing better than being friends with another author. I've always been of the mind that there's just room at the table for all of us. I just feel like we all have our stories, we all have our voice. Just because someone else is writing a memoir doesn't mean it's going to take anything away from me. I've often said if 5 people wrote Untethered, there'd be 5 different books because no one would tell it in my voice in the way I do. So I don't have a problem with that. So I just like to cheer others on.
I agree. And I think every time we read others' work and champion them, it just makes us a better writer as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Laura, our last interview question is always, our writers are such a unique group. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
I would say I've met so many people in our age group that tell me, oh, I've thought about writing a memoir. I've thought about writing my story. And I really encourage people to do it. And I tell them, I said, you don't have to publish it, but you need to write it down, because I said, write it for yourself. You can put it in a drawer, you can burn it, you can throw it away. I said, but it's so cathartic, and it can be very healing to write things down. And I said, then you can decide later if you want anyone to see it or not, and whether you want to publish it. Don't even worry about that. Just write it. And that you're never too old. I mean, there's so many examples of people that are publishing. I mean, the woman that wrote Where the Crawdads Sing, she's 70 something. And it's just never too late. And I still have so many things I want to write. I mean, I hope I'm writing until I fall in the grave, because I just have so many things. I just want to get them done. And I just tell people, just go for it.
I think that's great advice. I'm interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, even 90s. They're writing beautiful work. So I think we can write as long as we live and leave a wonderful legacy to those who come behind.
I believe that as well. That's wonderful.
So thank you so much for being with us and sharing your experiences today. And we look forward to this book and to many more to come. And we're excited to say that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Thanks, Joy. It's been wonderful being here.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend, and check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.